Hello, and welcome to SecureTalk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Hi, everyone, and welcome to SecureTalk. This is your host, Justin Beals. I've been building web applications for 20 years at this point, used a variety of different web servers, delivered all kinds of different business cases, and seen just a huge variety of different types of systems. All along that way, in inventing a new web application, we had to think about that application security. And a lot of times it was just considered a standard part of development. We needed to set up authentication. We needed to deliver encryption so that the data was private. We needed to think about resiliency of the system on some level. In big enterprises, delivering a single product on the web can take thousands of engineers at times, all working on a variety of different aspects of what they do. And the concept of application security management becomes a real issue. And certainly part of the challenge in getting your software out the door and in the hands of your users, realizing the value of it is getting through enterprise security processes. Today, we're going to talk to an expert in application security and application security postures. Idan Plotnik is a serial entrepreneur and co-founder and CEO of Appiro. Prior to Appiro, Idan founded Apiiro, which developed a network security solution for Microsoft Active Directory. That company was acquired by Microsoft for $200 million in 2014. Following the acquisition, he was appointed to the director of the Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics and Azure Advanced Threat Protection program. He served in this position till 2017. These are huge pieces of software that required thousands of engineers to deliver, and ensuring that that delivery happened in an effective way and passed the appropriate security testing as an application was a critical part of Idan's effectiveness. Idan's going to tell us about how he solved that problem today on SecureTalk. Idan, thanks for joining us today on SecureTalk. We're really glad to have your expertise on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So Idan, why don't we kick off with the work you're doing today a little bit? You are at Appiro. Tell us a little bit about your role and what Appiro does.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and CEO at Appiro. More than 20 years in the cybersecurity industry. And at Appiro, our mission is kind of simple. We help Fortune 500 companies to design, develop, and deliver secure software faster. We developed a technology called DCA, Deep Code Analysis, that actually connects to your source control manager like GitLab, and others, and automatically, without any human intervention, discover all your software inventory and architecture, like all the APIs, your GenAI frameworks usage, PII, and then allow you to use this software architecture for prioritization of vulnerabilities, remediation, prevention, and define guardrails, not based on CVSS score, but based on your software architecture and the business impact of it.
A lot of interesting technology layered in that for sure. I'm positive, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I always find that there's, and I think we love telling these stories as founders, you and myself. However, did you find computer science in the first place? Because something drove you this direction, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, everyone has its own story. My father, when I was 6 years old, literally he's so far away from computer science, but he bought me a computer, and I think I literally fall in love. And from gaming to development to hacking to I was just so curious. And from that moment, I knew that this was my path in life. So I studied in school. I served at the IDF in a cybersecurity unit. I had my own consulting services company. After that, I founded another startup that I sold to Microsoft in 2015. So, this is what I know, and this is what I love to do. Uh, that's it. I think this is my story.
What was that first computer and the software language that you used? Yeah.
So it was Pascal. Of course, DOS, but Pascal as the first language. And it was Commodore, but then PC, and Commodore for gaming, and then PC for development stuff.
Yeah.
I feel old. I feel old now because of all these questions.
No. Well, you're in good company, my friend. Either way, I had an Atari 800, and it had no drive. You had to program it in BASIC. And I think my dad.
I'm sorry that I'm interrupting. I can't say which company, but I was traveling to a large enterprise to meet a prospect, and they had an Atari, and I took a picture. It's like a piece of art from my point of view.
Oh, it was so fun. I loved working on that machine, and BASIC was a good programming language, I felt like, early on. And I did Pascal too in grade school some, but I think I also fell in love with how they were used. When did you get introduced to security? Was it early on? Were you trying, hacking as we thought about it in the early days, let's say, as opposed to today? Yeah.
So I think it's just, it happened. Like, you want to go into a website and you can't, and you are a bored teenager, and you're trying to break stuff, and then you read, and then you understand how things are working, and then you're trying to poke holes in that. And this is like early on in my computer's days. I didn't know it was hacking or security. I wanted to play games and get into websites or stuff like that. So I tried with the simple things, and then at school, I wanted to get and see others people work on their computer.
Yeah.
So it was just curiosity, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about a network in that way, right? Like when we first started getting personal modems and being able to connect to other computers, it was opening up a new layer of exploration.
Game changer. I remember I was reading the RFC for TCP/IP, and it was intriguing. Like, who invented this thing and how it works? And hey, I can change a few bytes in the packet, and something different will happen when I send it to another computer. This is fascinating. But you bring me back 20 years. So,
well, let's play the story forward a little bit.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that served in the military here in the United States. You served in the military in your country as well. Many of them that studied networking or computer science was a big part of the skill set that they practice in the military as well. Was that true for you as well? Did you work in engineering?
Yes, absolutely. And I always loved to combine between network and software, because I was super intrigued on how you write something and eventually translated into a network traffic that goes to another computer that translates it across the OSI layers. And so I did both.
Yeah.
Literally, I was involved in network architectures, but also software architectures. And this is how, after I finished my service, I said, hey, I can help other companies with their security posture by trying to find holes and help them fix it. Not in a bad way, like in a good,
Right.
a legit way. And I got paid for it.
Yeah.
And it was fun.
There's a power to it. One of my first professional computer science jobs was for British Telecom, and I worked in the global data center. So we did network operations, and a lot of my colleagues came from the military to come and work in the network operations center. I think some of it had to do with this sense of security and the 24/7 by 365, right? You're kind of never off duty when you're serving in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that it worked really well in our culture. And it was deeply about security. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the patterns that goes again through my journey is when I felt that I have this power of breaking stuff, I always wanted to think about innovation, like what we can bring to protect organizations for that. And we literally back then in 2009, we invented an industry that called UEBA, User and Entity Behavior Analytics. Why? Because as part of one of the pen tests that I did, I found a way to steal your NTLM and Kerberos ticket and move laterally between computers without knowing your password. And then it was past the hash, which was a huge, huge thing. And then we worked with Gartner. I tried to convince, by the way, that this is going to be a huge problem. No one listened to me back then. and every VC throw me out of the stairs and say, no, what's the connection between Active Directory and security? And look about, like, this is a $3 billion or even more, $4 billion industry that the leaders are CrowdStrike and Microsoft. So, and this was a company that we invented back then to identify abnormal behavior of users and computers inside your network. And the second, just to explain the pattern, when I sold my company to Microsoft and I was a GM for software engineering, I felt a pain where all these risk assessment and application security processes and tools like SAST and DAST and secret scannings and penetration testing and threat models actually stopped me from delivering software to our customers.
Yeah. And the life cycle of code deployment has gotten shorter and shorter over the years. I certainly remember more waterfall-based methodologies. But I mean, honestly, I think in a way it would have been hard to move to more agile without cloud computing resources and CI/CD. So we always have a chip on, that we're able to run. Yeah.
So true. And now it's even worse because now everyone moved, like, in the evolution of software development, everyone moved to Agile 5 years ago, like implemented. Agile exists for many years, but in the large enterprises, everyone are now working based on sprints. Everyone are using CI/CD pipeline to automatically do the continuous integration and deployments to the cloud. But the huge problem that risk management and application security teams are dealing with are now AI code assistants, because AI code assistants increased like exponentially the amount of code changes that are getting into every deployment and every release. And now you have the same amount of developers, but 100x more code. And it means many changes that you cannot manually review. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? So all the manual review processes throw them away. They cannot handle the load, which means that if you cannot automate security reviews, you will release more risks to the cloud.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what we are automating with our deep code analysis technology.
Yeah. Maybe, Idan, something that would help me out a little bit. I've released a lot of code, but to be honest with you, they were usually smaller teams. We didn't do that. We definitely weren't as heavy-handed as Microsoft with our security processes from a code release.
Yeah.
Let's say, prior to Appiro, what would you consider to be the required steps from a security perspective before code could go to production?
You need, from the design, the ability to codify your security requirements. You need something automatically that will run on every Jira ticket or on every Confluence design document and say, this is a potential risk design that will introduce a risk, or a feature that might introduce a risk automatically. So before you wrote even one line of code, so codify your security requirements, automate the assurance on top of Jira tickets and Confluence documents, or if you are using whatever other systems for feature request and design documents. Now you commit code. You commit code to the feature branch. You need an automatic machine in a programmatic way to take the requirements and validate them against code. And then say, okay, Justin, introduce an API that exposes PII data in a high business impact application. Stop, trigger a pen test, trigger a scan. You cannot scan everything, but you need first an inventory and then to codify these security controls and validate them automatically. Now, third step, you open a pull request. You passed all these checks, but now the code that Justin developed, plus the code that Idan developed, together introducing a risk. One piece of your code and one piece of my code are connected into a risk, what we called toxic combination. So now at the pull request, I need to tell you, hey, Justin, this is the risk that Idan introduced that impact your code. Here are the steps to remediate it or automatically suggest a fix. Now there is the build. And in the build, we are actually building all the code from all the developers. And it's a different set of security controls. And now you have the deployment, which takes even more risks from open source, and container registries. So you need to calculate all of that. And you need to check the box that you pass through a security review across all pull requests. You need to check the box that you passed a threat model after you build it. You pass through a SAST, SCA, secret scan, dust scan, and that you have all the compensating controls in runtime. And then you can release in a secure manner. This is what exactly Appiro automates. The design, the development, and the delivery phases. And then you release to the cloud. Or, by the way, not only to the cloud, you can release to our customers, release to a hybrid environment, to their on-prem, plus their cloud, plus their private cloud, and so on.
Yeah. So, Idan, I think that there's three major areas that I'm hearing about. One is your own code, right? Like the code we write for the software that we build.
Yeah.
Then
first party code.
First party code. Great. Then there is maybe what you might call second or third. Those would be the packages that we include in our code, but they come in as source code, right? They're not, they're built with the rest of the system. They're not binaries in a way.
But I will call them like open source code because you can actually see their source code in GitHub or in other places.
Yeah. And then the third one would be the infrastructure that it's hosted on, of course, everything from the operating system or the web server through to the cloud environment or hybrid environment.
I will add a few more.
Tell me.
I can take an SDK. SDK is a closed source component, not open source. I will give you an example. I don't know. Okta for authentication in my code. I don't know the source code of Okta, but I am embedding it as an SDK into my code, which is totally different from Log4j, okay? Which Log4j is an open source logging framework. So you have the first party code, you have open source code, you have SDKs, which is closed source from a vendor that you use. Now you have the source control manager, which is another attack surface because someone can breach your GitHub account. Now you have the CI/CD pipeline, which is a different attack surface, like the SolarWinds, that I can breach and inject code into your Jenkins server. And only then I have the infrastructure in the cloud that actually hosts or run this code.
Yeah. So you also see the code management tools that we utilize for the software development lifecycle as part of that risk structure that we're dealing with.
I would say this is the same attack surface, because if you the goal of an application security engineer or security architect, the KPI is to reduce the risk before your code will run in a cloud infrastructure. And if you look at it from the attacker perspective, then the attacker can go and inject malicious code into your own first-party code. It can inject to open source, and then you use the open source. It can inject malicious code into Okta SDK, and then you use the Okta SDK. It can breach your CI/CD pipeline and inject like the SolarWinds case. So you must, and I think this is the missing part in the industry. Everyone looks at application security and software supply chain as siloed attack vectors. No, it's the same attack vector, and it's the same persona that owns the accountable and responsible for reducing the risk of this attack surface. Does this make sense, Justin?
Yeah, I understand. I think the struggle, though, is where do you get the data for the viable threats to respond to? I mean, you mentioned the CVEs, for example, as being maybe a part of it, but in your perspective, not a holistic way of understanding the threat landscape. Is that correct?
Spot on. So in our risk engine, we take into consideration the vulnerabilities. It can be CVE, OWASP top 10, CWEs, and more. It can be material change. Like you replaced from Mongo to SQL Server. It's not a vulnerability, but it's a risky material change that changed your software architecture. No one looked at it because you use questionnaire for that. This is the second type. The third type is misconfiguration. You are now configured something that is incorrect in Docker file or in Terraform file. This is the third. The fourth is I would say malwares or unknown, like you see a malicious code like that exfiltrate sensitive data, no CVE, nothing, but it's a malware in your code. So this is the fourth. We have more types, like design risk types, API security risk types, secret risk types, and others. So we calculate them, and we can, because we understand your software architecture, we say, oh, just a second, in this code module that holds the logic of money transfer in my application, I see a RESTful API with SQL injection that uses log4j, that this API sends data to OpenAI. These three things are a risk. And we do not rely on CVSS or EPSS. They are great as small factor in the risk analysis, but CVSS or EPSS does not understand my software architecture in a bank or in a gaming company.
Yeah. I mean, it is a very binary analysis, right? The CVE is a specific vulnerability. It's affecting specific technologies. Now, I'm always, since we should dig into AI a little bit. I think both of us have played with these tools a lot.
Yeah.
When we say something like understand, and I think that both of us are struggling, or perhaps I am. I'll own my perspective. I struggle with the Silicon Valley nomenclature around data science. Like it's hard for me sometimes, Idan, to be like, we're using words that mean something to other people that they don't understand when we're talking about how, a data science, a model works fundamentally. When we say understand, tell us a little bit about what's important about understanding the software. Like what does your system want to know from a data perspective? Yeah.
First, I think AI is a fascinating topic because there are so many flavors of AI with different use cases. Okay. But to your question, we are trying to take source code and to translate source code into end components, not lines of code. I don't care about lines of code because these 5 lines of code in this file and these lines of code in different files can be a RESTful API that is connected to a data model that exposes sensitive data. So we need to take code, translate that into entities like API encode, data model, data access object, Gen AI framework, authentication logic, money transfer logic, and connect them on a graph. And then tell you, okay, Justin, you have 10,000 code repos. But if you look at a code repo in a visual way, or the inventory of the items in the code repo, it looks totally different. Totally different. And if it looks totally different, then the attack surface is totally different. And then the threat model is totally different. And then the security controls to handle these threats are totally different.
Yeah.
I think application security exists for 20 years. Okay. I remember as a kid, I'm not as a kid, like teenager, I was reading the Secure Code, a book by Microsoft. They didn't tell you that you need an inventory of your code component. They told you need a SAS tool to scan code and identify OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. I am telling you that we missed the most important thing in application security and software supply chain security. Everyone are saying SBOM. SBOM is great, but SBOM is only a small piece of your software architecture. It's only a list of open source dependencies. What about the sensitive data? What about the APIs? What about my encryption frameworks? What about all the other components that assemble my software architecture? So TLDR, you asked me, what does it mean and why I need it? It means all of my components that are connected to each other and they assembled my software architecture. And every software architecture looks different. And this is why I need to understand that to be able to help you secure your software before you release it and deliver it to the cloud.
I certainly have a high confidence in summarization models. We've been using them for years, right? And I've used them for everything from, just mathematical 3D modeling, to pick out vectors, to, natural language processing that we're dealing with today. There's a lot of innovation on the summarization side. And I can see how being able to look at a piece of code could give us a summary of what that code is trying to do, and being able to catalog the componentry. I like how you think about that into the appropriate generalized risk areas. Like, this is an API that represents a different type of risk and scan model. It must, I can see it coming full circle a little, Idan. You must have been sitting in Microsoft going, I have to have a API security analyst look at it, and then I have to have a database security analyst look at it, and then I have to have a front-end 503C analyst look at it, and a resiliency analyst look at it, and then my code gets launched 6 months later. Yeah.
Yes, I have nothing to say. It's accurate. And between us, I know no one is listening. You are lying in these processes, not because you are a bad person, because you want to deliver software faster so you can meet deadlines and help your company grow. And people do not understand that I cannot answer all these questions because I don't have all the answers and all the data, because I don't have an accurate inventory, and it changes on an hourly basis. So how can I keep up with all the risk management processes and questions? It's frustrated. And this is why we need automation for that.
Yeah. I always think I can tell when a team is non-functional if they don't use the same language. Like, we don't even have to talk about they use different tech, but if they can't use the same words to describe the problem, then we know they're not working well together.
Totally agree. And I see it in large enterprises. I see it as a huge problem.
Yeah. I wanted to come back to, you mentioned SBOMs. I've certainly been hearing about them a lot. My perspective on it is like yours. It doesn't prove any security, but I do think it's a compliance transparency issue, right? Like, my thought about it is that you're supposed to share these with your customers so that they can think about the risk matrix of, well, whatever you share with them. But like most things, we decide what we're sharing in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I first and foremost, I think that SBOM is and should be mandatory in every transaction. Unfortunately, I think that you said it a few seconds ago. It doesn't represent your application security posture. It's only represent your open source security posture. And what we are trying to influence the industry and some of the frameworks, and we're trying to say it's an extended SBOM. It's XBOM. What does it mean, an extended SBOM? XBOM means that I'm first and foremost, it's a graph format and not a list format. And then you have a graph that represents your APIs, your open source dependencies, your SDKs, your exit points, your sensitive data, and you connect them. Now, when you present this format to a security practitioner on the other end, on the other side of the transaction, he or she will be able to actually assess if your software architecture has risks or not. Now we support today any type of format of SBOM, generating it, but we also suggest our customers to generate XBOM, an extended SBOM, with all the components in their software architecture. I personally think that it's a great sign, or maybe not sign, it's not the right word, but it's a great progress in our industry of transparency. I want everyone at the procurement, at the sellers, at the technology divisions to understand that they need to be transparent. And if you need to be transparent, you are more, I would say, put more security controls on yourself so other people will not see the problems that you have. So you want to catch them earlier.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of transparency over a number of different concepts in trust, like, like the blessed modality of trust, where someone special or some entity has blessed this other entity, and therefore you can trust them. I don't like that as much as you can just see, the right level of information for that entity to have some sense of trust for them.
I think this is one of the core values of our company in Appiro. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be a core value of every software vendor. You know, we signed the Secure by Design pledge by CISA. Okay. So we provide evidence that we are implementing Secure by Design security controls in Appiro. And I want every company to do that because we have a very, very sensitive data for, a lot of very large customers. Okay.
Yeah.
And we are responsible for that. And I need to sleep good at night that I have all the security controls and I have continuous monitoring. And there is no way that any one of our developers can access our customers' data. And we have a multi-factor authentication, and we have encryption at rest and encryption in transit, and more and more and more. And I want the customers that sells Appiro software to show me and prove me as well. And this is transparency. And I think we're not there yet as an industry, but I feel confident that in the next few years, with the proper software inventory, which will be updated automatically without relying on people based on self-attestation processes, I think we will be in a good shape in the industry because we will at least know what we have, which is a huge problem. If you will think about this, every CISO that goes and build a security program, they start from inventory of all their endpoints, all their servers, all their cloud assets. Why they do not start with understanding their software assets, software components? And if you think about this, it changes much more often than your endpoints and servers.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I see the dilemma too. When I think about CISOs, they do that. They're going to go look at how many computers they've got to deal with, what the networking situation looks like. Maybe those are the areas that have more been a historical issue, just from a percentage basis, because maybe for a while we were okay as software engineers in, generally getting security close to the mark, but it's out of our control now. Maybe that's what I think few that don't write code understand anymore. And I think an example of that is the CrowdStrike issue, where it's like you're managing or deploying code to an infrastructure, but you're completely reliant for up to 75% of the data that runs your software on third parties, and it's impossible to keep track of it all.
I don't know if you saw. I totally agree with you on the CrowdStrike event, unfortunate event. Which again, they are an amazing company and they manage it in a very, very professional way. But Satya Nadella, okay. It's on LinkedIn. You can see it. He said we need as an industry. I think George Kurtz interviewed Satya Nadella because they form kind of a a forum to share more information on how to prevent these things. And Satya Nadella said, secure and safe deployments is a business goal, not a CISO goal.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you is you have a deep expertise in writing secure code, I think. And a lot of folks that are coming up as engineers, I did this, so I'm just gonna own it, Idan. That the reason that some of my code was secure is that we picked a framework to write our code in that helped us align with some important decisions about where variables were stored or how to share that information, what the interfaces for objects look like, things like that. If you're a young software architect, let's say your first gig, how do you want them to approach security from design in the beginning?
I think I will say one word: automation. If you think as a young security architect or an application security engineer that you will be able to buy SaaS tool or SCA tool and check the box and you're done, no. At the design phase, you need an automatic, programmatic machine. Now AI can help us. And again, this is one of the core from 3 components that we have in Appiro. This is the core thing that we are doing. We're saying you can codify your security requirements. For example, you cannot use any encryption framework in high business impact repos or applications except that one. How can you validate that? You can't go to the developer and tell them from tomorrow you can use only one security. No, you need an automatic way to validate that. And if someone is violating your policy, you need the guardrail. So automation, and more automation. You need to codify your security requirements. I don't care if you decide to use 5 encryption framework or 1 encryption framework. By the way, in an organization with 20,000 software engineers, you cannot use 1 encryption framework. You have 20 different programming languages. You have hundreds of different technologies stack. So you need a encryption framework for each one or for each stack. This is the complexities. It's a matrix that becomes multi-dimensional matrix. And without automation of your security controls and requirements, you will not be able to implement the secure by design program. And because it deviates every day.
I can definitely, I think this is a trend we've seen. I remember the days when we had systems administrators, and the only reason they call them DevOps now is because they write code more than they go into the server and change the configuration by hand. And that's the only major difference. And so I think what broadly we're seeing is a trend towards programmatic interfaces. And I see it in the security side. I see it all over the place. I was reading an article today how Jupyter notebooks grew by 98% in GitHub repos. And they're just such those things are little code tools. They remind me of the old days of just running BASIC in the command line. And I'm seeing it in application interfaces because no matter what your job, you need to know a little bit of programming. I think we've seen it jump from the Excel spreadsheet into almost all of our software.
By the way, I would say that you don't need to know programming. You can ask ChatGPT today, even if you don't know how to program. Literally, it's a beautiful technology. Okay.
I'm so careful about describing them in artistic fashion.
I don't know. It's exciting. It's exciting.
It's exciting. Yes,
it's exciting. Yeah. Sorry, I'm taking it back.
I love it. I'm glad to hear others' perspective. Professionals.
But my wife, my wife, she's not coming with. She doesn't have any engineering background, and she can ask ChatGPT to write macro code for Excel, or she needed something for her website, and she did it without understanding code, which is kind of fascinating, but also scary.
I think that use case is really valid. I do like using it for. It's funny. Now I'm going to use an emotional word. I like using it for inspirations, like little inspirations. So I can give it a topic and be like, show me some ideas on how to solve this problem. And I usually take one and will extend it some, but it does get a couple of ideas kicking. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are doing fascinating things. You talked about the design phase. Mm-hmm. We are now, we trained a private model to be able to identify like design risks at the feature request level or design document. But the thing is, where the magic happened is that because everyone can train, a model, but we have a core intellectual property of understanding your software architecture. When you combine these two together, the magic happens. I'm telling you, Justin, we saw sorry for my French, all the garbage out there that every startup thinks that they can run a model or ChatGPT, send all the tickets to ChatGPT and they will give them high quality. No. When you enrich that with your software inventory and architecture, suddenly you see the threat modeling stories in a different level of accuracy. The mitigation suggestions are becoming, because they know that you are using this framework for authentication and this framework for input validation. So if the threat is that, and how you can be much more contextual in your mitigation approach.
I think this comes full circle to what you mentioned about graph data models. It's interesting to me. I work in graph data models for our product design work all the time. It's a very important way of understanding. I found it a very powerful way to think about the foundation of a piece of software we're going to build, right? And so just a little bit, like a graph model to me is we have multiple objects, but we have a third piece of data, which is a definition of the type of relationship between the objects, right? Like this object has a relationship with this object. They are brother and sister, they're sibling, or, if you want to use a classic way of data modeling. What I think is really intriguing is that it's a very powerful way to look at complex systems, because you can't hold it all in your head. So you need to have a perspective, right? Are you guys seeing a similar?
Yes. And I think that people are visuals, like they understand exactly what you said. It's hard for them to read so many data points in tables. And when you visualize something for them, but it's so hard. Again, I don't know. I'm not, from your domain and what you are doing with graphs. But in our case, if you just take the software inventory and visualize it, it will be a mess. It'll literally be a mess because the graph is so busy with so many nodes and edges. So you need a domain expertise on how to cluster them and how to connect the right things. And you need to understand threats, because then you want to highlight the threats and maybe put them. It's a very complex process. And I think we got into a very good shape in Appiro on how to visualize things and across different use cases.
Yeah. Similarly, like we're trying to catalog the security posture of an organization at its broadest possible definition. So it might be HR, or financial fraud, or cybersecurity, right? And no one person can really grok that whole security posture. The CISO, it used to be their job, but it's too big. And that's why everybody needs their own lens. And if we don't understand the relationship of data to data, we can't create the right lens for them. Yeah.
I totally agree.
What an exciting conversation, Idan. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your experiences. Thank you for joining us today on SecureTalk.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me.